All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into a really powerful lecture from Catherine Fitts. She's a former Assistant Secretary of Housing, and she lays out this incredibly stark warning about where our financial system and our personal freedom might be headed.
So, Fitts frames her entire argument around this one idea, especially when she's talking about central bank digital currencies. For her, you see, the big shift isn't just about going from paper money to digital money. No, it's about moving from a system that's decentralized to one that is completely centralized. She says these things aren't just the next step for money, they're a brand new tool for control. Okay, so let's unpack what she really means by that.
To really get a grip on her perspective, we're going to walk through 5 key ideas from her analysis. First, her concept of official reality versus reality. Then, a really cool allegory she uses called the red button problem. After that, we'll look at the nuts and bolts of what she calls a digital control grid, the fight for who actually controls our money, and finally, her vision for what the real currency of the future is.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Official Reality versus Reality. This idea is really the foundation of her entire worldview, and it's key to understanding her argument for a kind of secret system of governance running in the background.
So Fitts says we're all navigating 2 different stories at the same time. You've got the official reality, that's the story we tell at parties, the public version of things. And then there's reality, the way the world actually works. And her crucial point is this: if you want to protect yourself, your money, your freedom, you have to make your decisions based on the actual reality, not the story everyone's telling.
And for Fitts, the problems we're seeing in the economy aren't just, financial glitches we can fix with a new policy. This is a huge distinction she makes. She claims the real root of the problem is what she calls a secret governance system that's running completely outside the lines of the law, basically making the whole official democratic process a kind of show.
Now, check out the number on this slide. Fitts constantly brings up this figure, $21 trillion. That's the amount that was reportedly unaccounted for in the U.S. government between 1998 and 2015. To her, this isn't just some big accounting mistake. It's Exhibit A for this hidden, unaccountable system operating completely in the shadows.
So, you're probably wondering, if a system like this exists, why don't more people push back? Well, that brings us right to Section 2, an idea Fitts calls the red button problem. It's a story she tells to explain how we might all be financially tangled up in it.
Fitts describes this moment where she asks an audience a simple question. Imagine there's a big red button. If you push it, you can stop hundreds of billions of dollars in dirty money laundering. Just poof, gone. But there's a catch. The second you do it, the stock market completely crashes. So, would you push it?
The results from her little poll were, pretty wild. Out of about 100 people she asked, only 1 person said they'd push the button. 99 said no.
And boom, that right there is her whole point. Fitts says this shows that most of us, when we're really faced with it, will choose to protect our own financial stability, even if that means we're helping to keep a corrupt system going. We don't want our 401ks to tank, so we sort of become complicit in the way things are.
Okay, so what's the tool that Fitts believes will lock all of this in place? That gets us to Section 3, a digital control grid. This is all about the technology she's warning us about.
The piece of tech at the center of her warning is the central bank digital currency, or CBDC. Now, on the surface, it just sounds like a digital dollar, right? But from her point of view, it is a completely different animal than cash because it's programmable and it's centrally controlled, which gives the people who issue it a scary amount of power.
For evidence, she points directly to statements like this one from Augustine Carstens, who's the head of the Bank for International Settlements. He says flat out that with a CBDC, the central bank will have absolute control over the rules. To Fitts, hearing a top central banker say the quiet part out loud like that was a massive red flag.
And then there's this quote from the IMF's Bo Lee, which really gets to the heart of what programmable means. He openly talks about how a CBDC could be programmed to control who can spend money and what they can spend it on. He even gives an example of limiting what people can buy with welfare payments.
So what does all this programmability mean in the real world? Well, Fitts often cites the Minneapolis Fed president Neel Kashkari, who laid out 3 things that CBDCs could do that, say, Venmo can't. They could monitor every single one of your transactions, they can impose negative interest rates right on your savings, and they could tax your account directly.
So when you put all of that together, total surveillance, money you can program, direct central control, Fitts argues you get what she calls, and it's a very dramatic term, a digital concentration camp, a system where every part of your financial life can be controlled from the top down. Now, all of this leads to what she sees as a fundamental struggle for power. Let's move on to Section 4, Reclaiming Fiscal Control. This is where Fitz really lays out the conflict she sees between central bankers and everybody else.
As you can see here, Fitz basically sketches out two competing systems. Over on the left, you've got central banker control. That's a top-down system, run by people who aren't elected. On the right, you have the people's control, which is supposed to be a bottom-up system that works through our elected representatives who are in charge of fiscal policy. You know, the power to tax and spend.
Fitz says the real fight is over what she calls the fiscal line. It's pretty simple, really. Who gets to decide how our tax money gets spent? She warns that a system with a CBDC could just rip that power away from our elected representatives and hand it directly to unelected central bankers, completely bypassing the whole democratic process.
So, after this pretty grim picture, what does Fitz think we should actually do? Well, that brings us to our last section, the currency of the future and her ideas for how we can push back. Her plan isn't about some high-tech counterattack. It's actually really decentralized and focused on community. She says use cash, use local banks, and invest in what she calls living equity. That just means putting your time and money into real, tangible things that support you and your neighbors, like local food systems instead of just digital things someone else controls. And finally, she says support your local state legislators, the people who can actually fight back on a smaller scale. And this quote right here really brings her whole argument home. For Fitz, the best thing to invest in isn't gold or Bitcoin or even dollars. She believes that in a world where digital control is growing, the most valuable currency you can have is relationships of trust.
So, at the end of the day, Catherine Fitz's analysis paints this picture of a big shift, away from financial freedom and towards centralized control. And she leaves us with a really important question to think about. Who holds the power in your financial life?